Ladies and gentlemen, one thing is for sure. We are not convinced. As the final speaker of this debate, I will be first proposing the clashes, and then talking about the overall outcome of this debate. The first clash that our side found during this entire debate was about the actual effectiveness, the actual efficiency of sanctions itself. Now, the opposition side stated that when we asked about the alternatives for the sanctions, the opposition side stated that diplomacy, talking and negotiating with the other countries, like North Korea, Cuba, was the best way, is the way that we can totally come to a good outcome. But we would like to ask this question, like we have already mentioned. Our third speaker has already mentioned this before. Did diplomacy work before? Because sanctions were put up before. Sanctions were put after diplomacy had failed. In other words, like our third side has mentioned, like the third side of the proposition, third speaker of the proposition has mentioned, sanctions were put up because diplomacy did not work. In other words, the argument given by the proposition has clearly has a fault, because what the opposition was stating is that because sanctions were going on right now and diplomacy didn't work before, but they somehow said that they assumed that diplomacy would work after we use sanctions. Secondly, another main clash during this debate was the minority issue, about the people who are the citizens and the farmers. The most widely used example was North Korea. Well, what the opposition side stated was that all of the citizens were not actually getting the needs from the sanctions, that only the powerful people who actually needed to get affected from the sanctions were not actually harmed. However, what our side stated about this was the fact that there are so many other factors, not the sanctions themselves, but for example, the overall outcome of the government, the layout of the government, communism. Those things were actually the factors during the fact that the minority was not being treated well. And as we have mentioned before, these are the factors that attack the minority, not the sanctions. And the final and most important clash of this debate was the fact that powerful countries, the so-called countries that are powerful and influential to the world, are not being affected with the sanctions. And as an example, they gave China and Tibet. Well, as our third speaker has already mentioned before, China and Tibet is not an international issue. It is not something that should be put on sanctions, because Tibet is a part of China. It's a national war. It's an invitation of a civil war. In other words, this national issue should not be touched with the sanctions, and is not a suitable and adequate example for this debate. Another thing mentioned was the fact that China was not affected, even though China helped North Korea substantially. But what our side has to say about this is the fact that China actually agreed to UN to stop overwhelmingly giving supplies to North Korea, and this is true because they already when the UN put the sanctions on North Korea, what did China do? China also agreed, saying that North Korea was not suitable, not a country that should be part of is a suitable country for the world, for the peace of the world, and the sanctions. And now that I have moved on to the third clash, I'd like to go on to the final clash of this debate, which is about the fact that the time issue, the fact that the sanctions took too much time to work. In other words, what the other side has mentioned was that the sanction on South Africa, the sporting side, about the Olympics, these sanctions were actually not working because these things were not actually worked by the sanctions, but other factors. Well, what we like to ask about this is, what are the other factors? And more importantly, as we have stated before, although there may be other factors that affect this total outcome of the South African sanction, the sanction itself has also been a substantially effective action that has helped the collapse of the South African government. Now, to summarize, the four clashes that our side has stated is the first, the efficiency; second, the minority issue; thirdly, the powerful countries; and finally, the time issue. And in our side's opinion, we have swept all of these four clashes and we take the debate home. Thank you.